Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Conspirinormal. And we are continuing a tradition that we have done, I think, since time immemorial now, is that we always finish off the year, the last guest of the year, for the last, I don't even know how many years since we've been doing this, has always been Dr. Future. And guess what? That has not changed, because Dr. Future is back with us to tell us where we will be living the rest of our lives, which is the future. So
I think I've heard that one before.
I think you might have. Yeah. To paraphrase the great Criswell. But welcome back to Conspirinormal, Dr. Future. It's been it's great to have you back.
It's been so long, I don't know if I even recognize the two of you.
Yeah.
A dim memory.
I know. It's not like I haven't seen you probably on a semi-regular basis.
Of course, when you get to be my age, just figuring out what you had for dinner that night is sort of a dim memory. So
yeah,
it's all fading really fast.
We got to catch up a little bit at Strange Realities.
Yeah,
right. Yep.
That was a blockbuster. I mean, you were even willing to talk to the little people like me during the showing with all the celebrities there.
Well, we had to get you past the security and the green room and everything, you know.
Right. Yeah.
I did see Paris Hilton there.
Dr. Future almost got beat up by the bouncers in the front of SIR, but we intervened just in time.
Yeah.
Before there was a huge seed.
I felt like the yippies at the 68 Democratic Convention. Or
like you were in the line at Studio 54 back in the day, Mike.
Yeah. Or Dan Rather on the floor of the 68 convention when the muscle came in. Some of Daly's men showed up at Conspirinormal.
Well, this is one thing that we like to do every year, guys. If you've listened to the show, we talk about the year that has gone by, and we get also some predictions from Dr. Future about what might happen in 2020 in the next year, which of course is 2024. And these are always kind of fun to go back and listen to. And so that's what we're going to do. I mean, we're just going to talk about some of the things that have happened and get Dr. Future's thoughts on them. But one thing that I have been doing this year with Dr. Future has been doing his radio show on WRFN, Radio Free Nashville, here in Nashville. So, Dr. Future, you want to tell everybody kind of a little bit about that and kind of how that got started?
Sure.
Up again.
It's funny that you refer to me as Dr. Future, and I see that on the list right here. You know, I'm afraid if I become a centenarian and my obit is in the New York Times, it's just going to have Dr. Future on the top of it. I think that's been submitted purposely. I don't know if anybody would know who I am otherwise. But regardless, the radio show was, I guess when the opportunity opened, in the back of my mind, I had thought, might it be a time to revisit doing the audio version of the kind of things I'm doing. But really, I quit Future Quake because I couldn't write full time, as inefficient as I am, and produce a show with the amount of research that I thought was warranted. What I thought was, if I do a show where I'm a little bit more savvy in the material prep that I do, maybe I can. I also found that aside from shows with great guys like you all and a few others, there weren't nearly as many venues for me to talk once the kind of material in my last book came out. For every door that opened, there was probably 20 that closed with the kind of material I had, and it was a shock to my system. So it was really hard to get the word out about what my research was going elsewhere. And so I had thought about, is there a way that I could practically still do my writing and have a presence on air? And just about that time, we had, I guess, had like some Thanksgiving or Christmas meal or something that that Rose, Dusty Rose, or whatever it is over there in East Nashville, the Rose Pepper. cantina, and we were Mrs. Bennett and I were meeting with the woman Jenny Welsh that runs the Radio Free Nashville, and her brother, and just out of the blue, she said, "Would you like to come back on the air?" So I didn't know if that was a sign, maybe that I should. It was sort of sudden. That was like at the end of 2022, and I asked her about the times they had, and it turned out a drive time slot was available. And so I said, I'd like to try that. Last time I was on it in the evening. And what I wondered was if they still listen to real FM radio, if maybe they would be stuck in downtown traffic during rush hour and maybe just bored and scanning the dial and might happen upon the show. And so, it's like I heard Orson Welles once say in an interview, a 1960 interview, they were asking him if he felt bad for all of his, genre-breaking work like Citizen Kane and how he revolutionized cinema and all his works, and he got so little recognition from the Academy of Arts and Sciences. And if he regretted all that, and he says, I've always been much more interested in experiment over accomplishment. And when I heard him say that, I sort of really thought about that for a while, and because he's, I think he's probably the most interesting man of the last 500 years, probably going back to Da Vinci. And I thought, I can relate to that. I have found in hindsight of my life that I have always gravitated, whether I wanted to or not, to seeing what if, the experiment over taking the worn out path that everybody else has taken to somehow have success or accomplishment or whatever. And so I guess in concert with that, I said, let's give it a try. And so I took the moniker of my blog at the time, which was the Two Spies Report, and that became the name of the new show. It was on every Thursday at 5:00. Started right at the beginning of January this year, 2023. And I just uploaded show 47 that will be airing this Thursday, I guess. 46. Be airing this Thursday at 5 over 103.7 FM and 107.1. And I found I bit off more than I could chew. Doing 1 hour of all the research and everything else has really just kept me overwhelmed this year. And normal people, it would not. Normal people wouldn't be that big. But there's been a lot of domestic stuff going on here that we're sort of overhauling our long-range planning. And my wife took a new job, totally changed all of our financial planning for the future and sort of our strategy. And I've had a lot of distractions like that that's boring stuff. So I was having to deal with some time-intensive things and try to do the research on this show. I will say I'm proud of the material in the show. Talking about experiments, we tried to do it once a month live in the studio.
Yeah.
And that turned to be, I won't say fiasco, but some of the most difficult, just trying to get the hardware to work and cooperate. And so I felt much better, producing them at home with the rudimentary equipment I've had. And I will tell the audience that what I wanted to do all along so that I could retain some audience that would find me really boring was to try to invite you, Adam, on the show once a month where we could just focus on contemporary storylines and not what basically evolved into a series, lectures that I was doing on the show otherwise. And in fact, one of those shows back in end of July, I guess, sort of dictated what I have been covering for about at least half or more of the show every week for the next 4 or 5 months. You rolled this grenade under the tent with a story, and then I have to go back and I got to look at that, see what that is. And then I got obsessed over it. Well, so that's what I've been focusing on the time. But the show itself, I have no idea. It's like my books. There's 700 and something copies people have bought that are circulating. I've sent out other ones myself that never get acknowledged. Don't ever really hear from anybody, for all the work. And the kind of like this last book I did, it's a polarizing book. I mean, nobody's going to look at it and say, whatever. They're either going to love it or hate it. Don't hear much of anything. Radio show, same way. I don't know if you get a lot of people responding on your show. I mean, you've been an institution for, 13 years or something like that.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, I think 700 copies of a self-published book, I think is pretty decent.
I'll say that's a win.
And the thing is just like you're doing the local. I wouldn't feel too bad about people not reaching out because I think we probably hear from I would almost say 10% of our audience.
If that.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty good.
There's a lot of people that, because I can look at my download stats and I can see that we'll usually hear mostly from the same few people, and that's not bad. That's not a bad thing. But just like there's always like just the silent majority out there that never really reach out. Or we had a guest on the show that this year that actually has been listening for a very long time, but I had never reached out until this year.
Yeah.
So you just never know who's actually listening. And actually,
do you think for the bulk of those people, though, that a week for all the hard work, because I know you all do a ton of hard work, both of you, research and stuff. Do you think for the most of those people, a week later, they even remember that much of what was talked about? I
mean, I think that would depend on the person.
Well, I'm just talking about it in numbers. Like, you talk about the kind of stuff that I would think would stir things in people, okay? Good or bad. And so that would be what they'd be inclined to contact you about, or at least try to encourage you and say, keep doing the show, I'm enjoying it. But for the overwhelming mass of people who you don't hear from, do you think, I'm just saying, I'm trying to sort of figure out the heads of our greater culture. Is it something where like a week later it sticks with them and they're still chewing on it? Are we in a culture right now where the majority of people, it just comes in and it's like headlines that you flip past on the phone, and it's regardless of whether it's a really good show or not a good show or whatever, it's just the way the brains are wired now?
I think that some stuff will stick with people. And like Adam said, it depends on who. I think some guests we have on our show definitely cause people to look further and, check out the guest book or the subject in more detail. But also the message of the medium, even though we're podcasts and you're still terrestrial radio, is essentially the same. And like you said, you're on a drive time show. And I think a lot of times this stuff can be background, not meaning that people aren't paying attention, but they're engaged in something else. They have a conversation that they want to listen to that's going on, a conversation or a lecture, and it's while they're doing the dishes or while they're taking a drive or something like that. We've talked about the same kind of thing. We've talked about why people are attracted to stuff that's more sensational or less has less discernment. And a lot of times I think people just want something spooky in the background. And that applies to the political, parapolitical, conspiracy stuff, whatever you want to call it as well. I think it gives them that same campfire feeling.
They want entertainment.
Yeah.
The emphasis is not on education.
Well, it's edutainment.
It's on entertainment.
It's edutainment. It's some kind of thing in between. People want to be stimulated, but I think like anything else, there's a segmentation to these listenerships.
Yeah, I mean, at least I try. You can see I got my big tall glass of adrenochrome. That I try to load up on the adrenochrome before this show so I can be at tip-top performance.
I've just got my Rainier beer here.
Oh, is that? Okay. That's that local?
Well,
I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Well, I'll stick with my adrenochrome here. But I was just curious about what you all thought about, what we're actually almost performing a psyop on the public in that we're putting information out and observing how, when we shock the monkey, what does the monkey do,
Well, with those terrestrial signals that you're sending out there too, have you calculated the speed of those radio waves and where they might be hitting by now? Have you got to
Well, I think the Future Quake show just passed Pioneer 10. So
Okay.
I'm excited. Before they see those golden records with the bodies,
Yeah, they'll get that.
people will hear about Nephilim or David Rockefeller before they see those, and that'll be their first impression of
Okay, that's
Homo sapiens.
So the first thing that I wanted to get into tonight is an outgrowth of doing the radio show with you. And I think in July, June or July, sometime around that time, I came up with this story that I actually think that I read on this show as well, that we talked a little bit about.
It was not an original on the Two Spies Report. You're saying
Well, I think I talked about
leftovers?
it. I think I talked about it on Two Spies Report first. And
Then that's fine then. Okay.
So this was one of the events of this last year, which now has kind of just faded into the background. Was this film that came out in the middle of the summer called Sound of Freedom. And this, of course, was like the film about child trafficking, and became kind of like a sleeper hit of the summer. And I came up with this article where all these people have been complaining in the movie theater that movie theaters were restricting the viewership of these movies, and that they were that movies were being interrupted mid-showing, and that this was all a big conspiracy. And of course, this is what sets you on the path to investigate the person that this film was based on. And of course, this is something that has also become somewhat of a scandal this year as well, although not really reported, I think, in the mainstream press too much.
Mm-hmm. Reported more than you might think. Have you talked about this whole issue with Tim Ballard and Operation Underground Railroad any more on your show?
We haven't. We really haven't. We really have not talked about it.
Okay, because I didn't know what all your listeners might already know.
And you did a excellent 2-part on Recluse's show, The Farm.
Right.
So if anyone wants to go, you can kind of get a lot of detail. But you actually dug into this and some real weirdness around this guy.
Well, let me just say, it's not that I've obsessed on this story, but if you would come over to my office any time in the wee hours of the night, any night of the week, you'll usually find about 25 tabs open on my browser with some late breaking or new news on this. So it's not like it's some dead end story that's going nowhere. Every day there's a new development of what has spun off of Sound of Freedom and Underground Railroad. And I almost have keyboard lockup if you're just sort of throwing the ball over to me to try to describe it, because there's so much there that I've been probably spending on average about 30 to 40 minutes per show since the beginning of August every week with new developments. Okay. So if I hesitate to figure out where to start, but let me try to just get a beginning to this. There is another mania that's going on right now that is a lot like the satanic panic manias or witch hunt. I don't know, Adam, you're the historian. If there's some other ones that we could compare those to when they get to be fads, maybe anti-Sharia mania might be in there.
a moral panic.
Well, yeah, whatever. But I was just trying to think of some examples of them. But it regards human trafficking and particularly sex trafficking. And there's been certain people that have been exploiting this issue. Like all of these issues get exploited by somebody. They see, there's gold in them there hills, and that's what they do with this. When they find something that stirs a chord in the public, their timing was perfect with the last few years because of the rise of QAnon, which was a separate movement that had to have something. People have seen everything. You accuse people of the Red Scare, and these people are communist, or they're a secret Sharia, Muslim, so you have to out who the Muslim is or the communist, and so there's fatigue of, extremism. And so what they finally figured out, if you got to pull the trump card, excuse the pun, of the most extreme thing you could accuse somebody of is that they're a pedophile. Okay. And then the worst thing, more than just being a lone pedophile, is you got to be some kind of organized cabal. And even better if you're like making money and it's an organized, like the mafia kind of thing. And so QAnon has basically, which was all, I think, started as sort of a joke there on 4chan or 8chan that took a life of its own. And then they figured out how to, in one way or another, monetize it. And then you got the most gullible parts of society, of which I would include the evangelical culture I came from. They will make sure they do most of the heavy lifting. The more ridiculous it is, the more that they will try to sell it. And so, it got to the point where I'll just give you a for instance. I'm at a Mexican restaurant in White House, little, community outside of Nashville, just north of where I live, waiting for Emmett, my first co-host, who lives up there, from FutureQuake, to come meet me. So I'm on the little patio veranda with some chips and salsa, and start talking to a guy next to, older man, older than middle age, and a woman with him, and he's an Assembly of God pastor. Okay. And I just say hello. And the first thing he says is, what do you think about all of these pedophile the Democrat leaders meeting underneath the Capitol with the children?
The capital of Washington, D.C. or Nashville?
In Washington.
Okay.
In Washington, D.C. Now, I didn't know who this guy was. I just said hello. I may have even asked him what's on his mind, maybe.
That was a mistake.
Yeah, but that was the first thing they said to a stranger, is about the all of the children that had been trafficked underneath the Capitol, the Democrats. And I do know that when they got the audio or the phone records, including that woman from Ohio, that was one of the ones, they all had the military gear. If you remember, they all had like the riot gear and had their hands on each other's shoulders going through the crowd there on January 6th. They were talking about shooting gas down in the tunnels. Okay, that was on the records that they obtained. They were going to shoot and fill gas in there. So these people are taking this very seriously.
Yeah. There was a heavy QAnon contingent there on that day.
Yeah. But I mean, it's not just talk. Okay.
Right.
So, but what I've also noticed back when I was, regular going to church services and things, there was always this like click with, we got to stop human trafficking. We got to stop kids getting trafficked. And there was never any talk about refugees that were stuck in refugee camps, or, kids on the border stuck out there with no place to sleep. It was always just the human trafficking. And, they'd bring up the sex and the other stuff. And there was almost like this sort of dirty, kind of pervy element that it was salacious, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Voyeuristic, yeah. We saw that.
Voyeuristic. That other stuff, the kids, they just didn't have. It had that extra little something. Like people in true crime, the old true crime novels that always had the women that had almost all their clothes pulled off and some guys holding a knife to their neck, Well, it's just a crime novel,
right. The hero gives you the excuse to consume all the salacious details.
Right. There's more than meets the eye going on there. And so there's something subconscious that is triggering with that. There's the sexual element. There's the vulnerable children there. And what this fella, Tim Ballard, came up with. Now, he has his story of what he does, and then there's the truth, okay? But basically, if I could sort of mix the two, he came out of Border Patrol. He says he saw kids getting trafficked over the border. He wasn't satisfied that the government was doing enough because, they have things like laws and rights, and they also have sovereignty issues with other countries. And he didn't really care for all that procedures. And so he got this idea, if he had sort of a vigilante group where you got a bunch of big, strong, burly guys with big muscles, and it was more of a Rambo operation where they do raids, that was the way to fix the problem. And so that's what he proceeded to do. And he founded Underground Railroad end of 2013, beginning of 2014. Okay. Now, what I'm ashamed to say is that somehow I didn't know about this until Adam mentioned it on the show here the end of July 2023, and I had to do a crash course because this has been around for a while. It just turned out that this movie, which was sort of the zenith of their popularity, it was the high water mark of this thing, happened this summer, which also happened to be the same time of the fall from grace. But he slowly built, he used the very visceral elements of it, of these big tough guy cowboys rescuing these defenseless kids with these real villainous looking guys. He made them like on camera raids. So he had the reality show element that people seem to love. He got really, really wealthy people who are not going to say, oh, I don't care about children getting trafficked. What are they going to say? No, thanks. I'm not interested. They all saw elements that could help their perception with their public. He got guys early on his side like Tony Robbins, the motivational speaker. Tony Robbins, who ironically already had skeletons in his closet about sexual harassment of young women, which I didn't know until I started researching this. Well, he started providing a lot of resources for it. Something that most evangelicals don't know is that this whole operation is a Mormon operation. Okay, they don't advertise that. You have to look for certain words said that people are in the know. It's like, oh yeah, these are Mormon guys. Just so happens they're all out of Utah too. But he had people in high places helping him. One of the guys who was looking for something macho to latch onto was the Attorney General of Utah. His name is Sean Reyes. This guy's a very bombastic kind of guy. He headed all the movements in the West to overthrow the elections, certifying the results of the elections in all like number of the Western states, put up alternative electors. You know, he's a real aggressive kind of guy. Okay, he's not just looking at enforcing law in Utah. He's trying to build a name for himself. Well, he got on early, and so he started advertising himself that he was the muscle. And he's like a sort of a overweight kind of guy, nothing impressive to look at. But he would go down there. He said he was going to be the muscle, and he was going to stare this evil in the eye, and he was going to give him the long arm of the law. And so he would go down there and pretend. And this is all like cowboys and Indians. They would do a psyop. They would say they're going to go down there to buy these kids. Okay, they're going to go buy them, and when they did, it was a raid, and they would come in and they'd send the authorities in to get them. People have asked questions like, well, if they knew where all these people were, how come the authorities weren't getting them to begin with? And what in recent years people have been talking so long about this is that they go to places in Haiti or Mexico or Central America where they're best they could tell there's no child trafficking. But suddenly there becomes child trafficking after they've shown up because they start throwing money around, insisting to have underage girls brought to them. And even when the people say there aren't any, they'll say, well, look, we got this money. We want to see them. So
it's called supply and demand, right?
It became sort of a righteous sex tourism thing because if you were really, really wealthy, like some Silicon Valley people they hired, they would put them on camera where they could watch it over their shoulder when they were doing this and, you know, having the raids occur and everybody's going to fall on the floor. And as it turned out, they were getting like grown adults. They were getting like adult sex workers who were there purposely. They didn't care. What they want to get was the footage.
Right.
So there's so much here. I'm trying to figure out what to leave out, but he had big plans. he started doing documentaries. He had one called, it was one of them was called Operation Toussaint. But he tried to brand this as that they were the new abolitionists. That was one of their documentaries they made, where they just look over the shoulders. And they've even commissioned, the guy who does the pictures for Donald Trump, where he shows the founding fathers patting Donald Trump on the back and Obama standing on the side and he's stomping on the Constitution. I don't know if you all have seen those pictures.
Yes, I've seen those.
Paintings?
Yeah, they're paintings and they're suitable for framing. They're sort of looking like the dogs playing poker. Something about that good. But
there's also the ones with like the series of all the Republican presidents like sitting around a table with each other, patting each other on the back, and I've seen all those type of things.
And the founding fathers crying when Obama's standing there and stuff. Well, anyway, that same artist, he got to paint a picture. And this picture shows Tim Ballard carrying this poor kid down a railroad track. It was called Operation Underground Railroad. And he's carrying the kid. And you've got Harriet Tubman from the real Underground Railroad, holding a lamp for him. And all these other people rescue people. And these founding fathers, Abraham Lincoln is cheering him on. And then you got, of course, Montel Williams in the picture. And Ashton Kutcher in the picture. And some other people like that, because they had paid a lot of money to help make this thing happen. Oh, Mike Tomlin, the Pittsburgh Steelers coach, he was in the picture too, alongside the founding fathers. And people just love this stuff. I mean, they just eat it up.
There it is, by the way.
Yeah. And you can see them bring them, and there's some founding fathers there, and Harriet Tubman with lamps, and over on the other side, I think the bearded guy is, no, I don't know if that's Ashton Kutcher, but, that woman right there, Mia Love, I think she's a congresswoman from Utah.
I'm guessing this guy's a Mormon as well.
The whole operation's Mormon.
Yeah, but this
Abraham Lincoln's over there too.
These paintings really remind me of the very white Jesus that appears in most Mormon households.
Yeah, it's got. Well, if you notice, there's a little saintly glow around the heads of these guys, and walking down the railroad tracks, you have a little glow around their head. But when I say that it's a Mormon thing, it's more true than I intended, because if you see Abraham Lincoln and the other founding fathers off to the side, this fellow, who I don't think has any degrees in history whatsoever, has written a number of books, and he advertises himself as a historian. And this is where Glenn Beck started promoting him and made him, buddy with him, because he wrote some books recently saying that Abraham Lincoln had read the Book of Mormon, and that's what led him to do the Emancipation Proclamation.
Yep, heard that.
Because Mormonism and releasing from slavery go hand in hand. Another book he wrote was that, and this is
Tim Ballard who wrote
Tim Ballard,
yes.
The guy who founded Operation Underground Railroad. He also wrote a book talking about the Pilgrims, in that one of the men on the ship was washed out at sea. He went up on top deck and got washed off and should have been lost, but by a miracle, he grabbed onto something and was able to pull himself back on deck. And later on, he says that this man was the ancestor of Joseph Smith, who started the Mormon religion, which is absolute proof that God was behind finding America to be a Mormon nation.
Remind me to circle back around to Glenn Beck, too. I want to talk about that later, because he's really been absorbing a lot of the most fringy, up-to-date mutations of conspiracism.
Well, I just wrote a lot about his dilemma with this guy in the last show that we'll be playing this week, because he's come to a crossroads with this guy, because he's been one of the main promoters and bankrolling him. Okay. He put up the money, Glenn Beck, to start this Operation Underground Railroad. Supposedly, M. Russell Ballard, who was the head of the apostles, the Quorum of Apostles, so I think he's third in the line for the presidency of Mormon Church. He was the one supposedly who really pushed this other Ballard guy, who's no relation actually, Tim Ballard, to get out of the Border Patrol and to do this full time. But big players were putting all the money in. Now, they started doing these raids and all of these other places and getting a lot of Christian support, getting a lot of Christian, because they're saving from these dastardly guys trafficking these kids, and they say they're doing all sorts of aftercare and things. Well, this was all dramatized in the movie that was actually done a few years ago, but finally released this summer, called Sound of Freedom.
Yeah, it was filmed in 2018.
Yeah. Jim Caviezel, who used to play Jesus, he's a very big QAnon guy, hardcore QAnon, who swears that Tim Ballard told him that they found, what was I talking about here? The adrenochrome, that they were harvesting the adrenochrome from these kids, and they found it out. And he knew it. In interviews, he was telling them this. They also found
so Ballard has said this about adrenochrome too.
Caviezel said that Ballard said this. Okay, in interview, they also said that the main adrenochrome factory is in Ukraine,
right?
And the Ukrainian government is harvesting it, and Putin is trying to put a stop to it. To stop the adrenochrome. This is Jim Caviezel. Okay,
and that was the whole reason to invade Ukraine, was to stop the adrenochrome.
Well, yeah, part of it. Well, that the Nazis, obviously. And so, anyway, these raids are going on. They're getting Christian attention a little bit at a time. He's really pushing it. He's got the Attorney General of Utah pushing it. Well, when they decided to do this movie, because they've done some other documentaries, and when they did this movie, they recruited Caviezel to play it. The Attorney General of Utah was one of the main bankrollers and was the producer of the movie. Another guy, Hutchinson is his name, huge big money guy in internet sales and in real estate sales in Utah. A guy that has a very disturbing, curious background, but actually was involved in his own anti-human trafficking stuff with his largesse of money. He's probably, if not a billionaire, close to it. He started participating in the raids too, and he also was one of the producers of Sound of Freedom. Now, the other guys who produced the movie were originally convicted not long ago of Medicare fraud, where they had set up fake businesses to get doctors to send them for fake treatments that they were charging Medicare, and
as one does.
Had a major case. These people all have this interesting issue. Like M. Russell Ballard, the apostle, who supposedly was, and he's tried to deny this, and the wagons were circling around him now, and he did the smart thing. He died real quick. He just dropped dead all of a sudden. A few weeks ago.
He was, what, 95?
Yeah, he was like 95, but he was still chasing the dollar.
Yeah.
And if I recommend, if anybody's intrigued by this story, they should go listen to an old muckraker journalist who now, he used to be one of the top guys in Utah television investigation, and he taught journalism at Brigham Young. His name is Lynn Packer.
Yep.
Lynn Packer is one of these guys that just won't let things go. He's old school. He puts all his ducks in a row. And he had said a lot of surprising things, like this Hutchinson guy, about his reputation with sex parties and stuff at this place where they were doing all of the mystical planning for what Operation Underground Railroad was going to be part of something bigger. But he had shown that M. Russell Ballard had a whole life, and here he is, like third in line for the throne there, presidency of the Mormon Church, of being a con man, of having been banned by the SEC for the penny stock rackets that he'd operated, and all sorts of business rackets where people lost their shirt, and the Mormon Church had bailed him out over the years, then putting him in this position. But supposedly on this big money windfall, and the movie itself has been hundreds of millions of dollars bringing in. Well, Lynn Packer, since probably 2014, 2015, has been putting the case that these rescues really weren't happening like they were saying. Back in 2020, December, Vice, who deserves a Pulitzer Prize for what they've been doing at Vice, they started finding out that all of these rescues didn't go down like was said, that everything was exaggerated. A lot of people who saved themselves, they took credit for rescuing. But when it really got bad, there were some things that came up before this time, but nobody was listening. But now when the movie came out and it got to be this huge sensation and the Christian people were all buying tickets, they were being goaded to, by the way, at the end of the movie, to buy up studio tickets, even though people weren't going, to pretend they were sold out. So
there was a pay it forward type of thing going on. And just to point out, everything you're saying was all there in the public record already.
Right.
Like none of this was new information necessarily.
That's right. And so a couple of things that did come out early that were important was that, like, when they went to Haiti to rescue this kid, and I think he's talked about in the movie, he was a little Haitian boy taken from his dad. His name was Gardy Marty. And he has been obsessed with rescuing this kid. Well, his people who give him his tips on where people are and that he uses for all of the missions told him that he was in this village in between Dominican Republic and Haiti. And they went down to this little shrine thing of M. Russell Ballard and went down there to energize and get power from M. Russell Ballard's missionary place down there. Called him to tell him that they had the boy. Tell the man's son we got the boy. Well, what the operators found out there was that his source for this intelligence data, which, by the way, the boy wasn't there, was a psychic. This woman was a psychic named Janet Russin. And what this woman would do, and this was for all of their missions. Now, this is what the evangelical Christians are putting big money in to support. She was channeling the prophet Nephi. And Nephi, which was a Mormon prophet from like 600 BC. So
haven't you ever done that, Mike? Haven't you ever channeled a Mormon?
I probably would be a lot more successful in what I do if I would tap into somebody, Art Bell or something. But anyway, this is what they found out was the source of what everything they were doing was what this woman, she would go into this trance and sort of start talking and hearing from Nephi, the prophet, all of a sudden. Okay. Later, when there was an investigation started this year by Davis County about all of the donors being misled, all of these raids that were going on weren't happening, the money was being misappropriated. And so those records have had to have been turned over. And those records show they had 10,000 pages of psychic readings of this Janet Russin about the prophet Nephi. Okay, and that's what they were using for all of this stuff. Well, what Lynn Packer found out on his end was that there was actually a grand jury fielded, and there was high-powered people that appeared to come in, and the FBI was there as well, and basically shut everything down on the study and told the head of the Davis County who was doing it, because you see, the state attorney general couldn't do it because he was best buddies and was involved in the operations of it. He was a producer of it, so they couldn't use the attorney general of the state. So this county's doing it, and through that, that's where they find out these 10,000 pages of all of these psychic readings that go on. Well, to make a short story or a long story shorter, what was even worse was in this process of pretending to be traffickers that were showing up. It was like a big, masquerade game they played. They'd go down and pretend it. What Tim Ballard would do was that he would get these married women, Mormon women that were married or single parents or whatever, that were very sincere, practicing, devout Mormon women. And he would say, we got to do something called the couple's ruse. And the couple's ruse was that they had to pretend like not only they were married, but that they were very, very promiscuous. And so he would want them to do all sorts of sexual things to him in front of these traffickers. And they also was the excuse that he wouldn't touch the girls because, his wife was there and she was really promiscuous. And so he also decided that it would be best if they practiced for many, many, many months back home in Utah. But he asked them, please don't tell your husbands. They wouldn't understand the spiritual mission. And this has been blessed by Apostle Ballard. Okay. But don't tell your husbands. And I'm going to give you a burner phone. And this burner phone, any email I send you, you text, because it's for the children. And it could endanger the children if you let anybody see it. And so he would take their hands and put them on his groin area and move it back and forth. And if they sort of retract it, he's like, don't you love the children? Don't you really have to believe in the children? And he would kiss on it. And he says, look, I have gotten a special priestly dispensation from the apostle to do this. And so he would try to get them to loosen up and do the massage around his parts and around theirs, and where he could start taking their clothes off and feeling them, grabbing them. He says, look, this is what they want. So then what he's doing is he takes them to strip joints. He takes them to strip joints and has them do lap dances with him. Now, so far, there's like 6 or 7 women who've come forward that he's done this to. These are like church-going women, okay? These are like really reserved, shy church-going. And he's wanting them to do lap dances or do them with other prostitute women that they hire there, dancers, to do it with them, because that would really impress the traffickers when they go on their trip.
But you got to maintain the cover.
You got to do it if you love the children.
Right.
It's the ultimate cause to justify anything.
And, but he would browbeat them so much that they were going to let the children down if they backed off. And that there would be, these operations would collapse and those children would stay in chains if they didn't play along.
Right.
And these sadly very naive women, were browbeaten into that. And, sometimes he would pass off some of them to one of the other operators, and they were supposed to do the same thing. And now here's an interesting thing. I haven't even shared this on my show, but I'll give you a little scoop.
It's a Conspirinormal exclusive.
If you want.
All right.
Okay. And I'm going to talk about this later on my show, but there's a Nashville connection to this.
Oh, of course.
Okay. One of the places they had access to was this island in the British, Virgin Islands, I guess. It was privately owned by a woman. And they would go down there and practice. These women would practice sort of pawing all over, mostly Tim Ballard, but the other women where nobody else could see. And they'd get away from their husbands. And they had catamarans, and they'd go out there and play volleyball and basically just sit around and, do heavy petting and try to arouse each other. And they would do that for a long time. The woman who provided the island to do these things was a woman by the name of Brittany Turner. And Brittany Turner is a very famous person in Nashville. She's not she's probably 35-ish, something like that. Brittany Turner, and I've not seen anybody report about this at all. Somebody mentioned the island, and then I had to go look up to try to find out who owned that island. Turned out it was somebody who owned a lot of real estate. And it was connected to somebody who was then connected to Nashville, who was connected to a company she owns here in town called something like Aerial Development, something like that.
Oh, that's big time, dude.
Are you familiar with that company?
Yeah.
You are?
Big time in Nashville.
Okay. I don't know if you're familiar with the owner of it. Her name's Brittany Turner. She seemed like a very sheltered person. She was a former Miss North Carolina. She went to Morningstar University, which is not really like your regular accredited university. It's Rick Joyner, one of the apostles of the New Apostolic Reformation. that was his gig to train Delta Force people, spiritual Delta Force people for Dominionism. And that's what she went to. She still didn't have any way to make a living, so she lived out of her car, but she'd seen somebody tell her something about flipping houses. So she started flipping houses, came to Nashville, I think, because of a relationship she had. And one thing led to another, and eventually she got more property. And now she's got this big development in real estate. And now she trains people as a business coach consultant on how to supercharge your business and be successful in business and train your workers, even though she has no formal education in business whatsoever. But she started doing a lot of stuff on her own with trafficking and started trying to help people or disasters or things. And she learned, I think she became a pilot. She ended up marrying the like a special forces guy, marrying him. You see her stuff. It's very much very TikTok friendly. She sort of can strike a pose and, she's an attractive woman somewhat, and she just has the look, to get people following her. Well, she was the one who bought this island nation that was bringing them in to do all this stuff. Well, when he finally got thrown out of Operation Underground Railroad, when an anonymous letter started going to all of the donors about this stuff going on, and people started retracting from it, and then they did a quiet study and made him leave, he fled to another outfit called the Spear Fund. And the Spear Fund is like what he's hanging on to be able to stay relevant and doing this stuff with a guy who, at least until recently, still believed in him. The other two operators were this Brittany Turner and her husband. And I've been tracking their website and checking the what's archive.org have. It has the Wayback Machine. Yep. You can get dates on the websites. Well, suddenly in the last week, they've disappeared. So they're no longer on the website. So things are changing every day on who's willing to affiliate. Now, the Attorney General has now thrown Tim Ballard under the bus because Tim Ballard was getting prepped to run for the Senate seat of Mitt Romney this year, since Mitt Romney's going out. And the Attorney General of Utah had already given an insinuation that he was going to endorse Tim Ballard. Well, now he's become so radioactive that the Attorney General of Utah has now had to say he's not going to run for re-election because of this. And I have chronologically gone through all of his statements where he still had support for Tim Ballard, and he says he has his right to present himself in court to show this stuff is not true, and he believed him. Well, now he says he believes the women, and he's also not running for court. But this is something that I think you guys and Surfield probably would appreciate. If I peel the onion back, there's a lot of details I'm leaving out that are extremely disturbing, other peripheral elements of this, because there's sort of like a mania now. Now there's new groups trying to do this. Even what's the Charlie Kirk's group? What's the famous conservative group that Trump helped? I can't think of their name. Anyway, they've got a group that's doing this, but they're trying to out transgender people who are going for underage people. But now Tim Tebow has an operation. The other day, I went to Texas Roadhouse to get some food, and on the front of their website on Texas Roadhouse, the gift cards are going for Christian organizations to stop human trafficking.
Oh my God!
That's when you buy your gift cards. That's what it all. It's everybody's getting in on the act. And now I just heard that Ken Cuccinelli, the former Attorney General, who was like, I guess, on the staff there for Trump, he's now forming another evangelical group to fill the void that Tim Ballard has left. But I was going to mention that there's an infamous whiteboard meeting that happened just a couple of years ago where the insiders with Tim Ballard were brought to Hutchinson's mansion for this meeting, and some pictures got snapped and were taken out. And what it showed was that Under Operation Underground Railroad and these rescue operations were what he called the sizzle. It was the sizzle, and the testimony that's been on the court records, because we now have the FBI interviews under oath, and we also have the affidavits for the 5 women who've sued him. The second in command of Our has confirmed this, because he was at the meeting, was that Tim Ballard said the rescues of the kids were the sizzle to get the evangelicals and other people on board. But the point was to bring them under the covenant, the Mormon covenant. And the other thing
it's a proselytizing mission.
There's 2 things. One is that's their holy mission that makes them feel good and pat on the back because they're going to make everybody Mormon. The other one is, and supposedly M. Russell Ballard was in the middle. The other thing was they took a, quote, nonprofit, and they formed all for-profit businesses underneath it. So when they would give money to the nonprofit thinking it's going to the kids, it goes to timballard.com, it goes to slavestealers.com, it goes to all these things. I even had a mercenary group, sort of like a Blackwater, called Deacon Incorporated. The money got funneled through that. Then they had something that was a child adoption agency that they put the psychic woman in charge of, along with Tim Ballard's wife. And they were, Tim Ballard, at least his official salary, apart from the windfall from the movies, he was only getting $900,000 a year, okay, for doing this, on top of like all of the proceeds from the movies. He showed he was getting $100 to $200 million from the movie. But the key was, and this is where M. Russell Ballard, the apostle, was in the middle of getting the windfall of this money too, which is consistent with what his whole life had been as an operator. But also it was to get them all under the covenant. Now, another meeting that they had was with a related meeting that was also on the board called Liberty 89. Liberty 89 was another group. And according to the woman who was the developmental director for our Operation Underground Railroad, who was she would do the grants, she would get the money to come in, oversee it. And what she testified under oath was that Tim Ballard invited her to this very secretive meeting because she had shared some spiritual things with Tim. And Tim says, I want to show you the secret things that I'm involved in that other people don't know about. So they went to a meeting of this Liberty 89, and Liberty 89 had a guy by the name of Hugh Vail, Ken Krogh, Tom Harrison, and Tim Ballard. And what she said they were told was that these men had a special vision and revelation they were given about the second coming, and basically how this activity would facilitate the second coming. Now, Ken Krogh is the guy that runs the new place that Ballard is hanging on to called the Spear Fund. This is where that Brittany Turner of Nashville was out. Now she's split. Ken Krogh ran InsideSales.com. These guys are all from Utah. They said he's the second biggest force in internet sales and inside sales in the country. Filthy rich. He had a car crash, had severe brain injuries, and this man who was also a psychoanalyst and sort of a mystic, Tom Harrison, did rehabilitation of him and brought him back whole. So he's a disciple of one of the other guys at the meeting, Tom Harrison. The guy, Hugh Vail, is probably the best-known Mormon prepper, apocalyptic prepper, goes back a long time for prepping for what they call the call-out, which is, in the Mormon church, they say there will be a time when you're told to report to your local temple or your ward or whatever, and you will be told to take up your tent and all your belongings and head for these certain rural areas in Utah and set up your tent cities, and the apocalypse is supposed to happen immediately, and there's going to be a supernatural protection for you. He was sort of at the forefront of getting the most advanced preparations to support that. And what they say in their stuff is that there's supposed to be an earthquake that's supposed to destroy Salt Lake City, even destroy the temple there. It's going to rip apart Utah. Then you're going to have roving gangs in America that are going to start not only killing people, in raping them, but cannibalism. They're going to eat people alive. And it's only these Mormon camps that are going to survive. So the other guy that's there, this Tom Harrison, it's the worst kept secret in the world. He's gone under a pseudonym that's called Spencer. And the Spencer guy was the star that was interviewed in a book that really revolutionized a major part of the Mormon church. I mean, back in 2017, they sold over 100,000 copies of this book. Okay, that was in 2017, in 5 years' time. So you really can't say it's an extremist or prepper's book. It's something almost everybody's read or know about. And it's called Visions of Glory. And this Tom Harrison gentleman, who's a psychoanalyst, he analyzed kids that had traumas and stuff like that. He had 3 near-death experiences. And in these near-death experiences, Jesus came to see him, the Mormon prophets came to see him, and they unveiled the entire end times in great detail and what was supposed to happen, blow-by-blow account of the tribulation period. And a major part of the church accepts this, although what happens is with these extremist visions, the Mormon church won't come out and say exactly, well, this is official teaching, and it's not. They're sort of ambiguous about it. If it gets real out of hand, they'll speak up about it. Otherwise, they just sort of let things roll.
If it gets crazy, right?
That's what they had to do with Tim Ballard. Okay? They let Tim Ballard do his thing until he used Apostle Ballard's name one too many times, and the thing came about the women, and then they basically came and said, we don't have anything to do with him. So
once you begin to embarrass
right,
the inner sanctum, you
got to deal with it. And so this Liberty 89 was all about, part of the end times was to get all of America under the Mormon covenant. It sort of ties into the White Horse prophecy about the Constitution hanging by a thread and all that. And the books that Tim Ballard did and all this, but really getting people energized in trusting them and following them because of the kid issue was to get people to get involved in the Mormon covenant, accept the fact that the founding fathers understood that, as they teach, this is a restoration of a covenant that we have all been in violation of for the whole church age. That the Mormon church was to restore the covenant that had, I guess, been sublimated, because they teach that the scriptures had been corrupted, which is really the same thing that Muhammad said, that the Christian scriptures had been corrupted and he restored it. So there's some corollary there. So this Liberty 89 was to bring this mystical thing about. And so that was the core people that was pulling this off. And I don't think they've necessarily let go of this mission, although things are being exposed now. But, just like you're saying, so many few people know about this. The Christian world, nobody's talking about that over on the Christian media. They're still supporting it completely.
Yeah, and also, too, I mean, the sound of freedom in and of itself has become old news now. But he's writing these books that are very much recasting American history in light of Mormonism, similar to the way David Barton has been doing for several years now, which is recasting American history as everybody was evangelical and the founding fathers are evangelical and all this.
Oh, by the way, they have a connection, Adam, because Glenn Beck had Tim Ballard take over running his own operation as well. And that was one where David Barton was in control too. So you had two guys, and you know what? They have different religious worldviews, but cynically, it supports them to sort of have co-opetition with each other for mutual benefit for them. Sort of like how the Christians and the Zionists in Israel have different beliefs on how the end game plays out, but it behooves both of them to cooperate and don't ask too many questions of each other where they depart.
Right. Because Sergio was wanting to bring some things up about Glenn Beck. So this is a good place to do that, I think.
Well, Adam, didn't you send me a photograph of a book that you recently saw? Where was that? A Glenn Beck book?
Yeah, I mean, I saw that in a Barnes and Noble
Okay.
not that long ago. Actually, I can pull the picture up here.
I mean, Glenn has talked a number of times about the Constitution hanging by a thread, which comes right out of the White Horse prophecy.
This was a book. I mean, I think it's like a series of books that he's written about like the Great Reset. It's called Dark
he's
Future.
Really at the forefront of. I've seen him interview and kind of absorb narratives from a lot of these.
It's got a picture of Schwab and
concerning the Great Reset, concerning like the future of AI and this whole kind of end game thing. AI opening up Stargate to demonic forces and humans being controlled through this, scientific medical establishment that wants to put nanobots in us and all this like really, really fringy stuff. But he's like fully on board pushing this to a larger audience than the talking heads that I've seen the interviews that he's had with. Oh, I saw an interview with Whitney Webb. She puts it into this really apocalyptic narrative about the future of transhumanism and all this kind of stuff. Basically, the next wave of conspiracism, which I've predicted for a long time, is going to be this really existential thing about the elites are wanting to enslave us in some kind of Brave New World thing. And like you've seen, too, with Tom Horn and all that kind of stuff, the Beast Tech, they've been on that stuff for a while. But Glenn Beck is really, I think, one of the biggest voices who's mainstreaming the stuff that's existed in this fringe conspiracy world for a while.
Yeah, and he's pulled it off better than Alex Jones.
Yeah,
and Alex Jones...
These are similar narratives to what Jones was probably talking about like 10, 15 years ago, even more.
Yeah, Alex Jones got stuck in fringe world and couldn't come out, and then he tried to ingratiate himself to the far right because that's where the money was, but he never got out of that, whereas Glenn Beck's walked this tightrope. And in fact, he jeopardized it at the end of his Fox News run.
Right.
Because in Fox News, he was getting so much off of what they thought the bounds were that they ran afoul. And so, but he's been able to pull it back. I mean, there's guys that I'm sure probably some of your listeners know. I know Adam know. People like Mike Heiser, who recently died. More of a theologian, trying to keep people on the straight and narrow on certain things. Big devotee of Glenn Beck.
Yeah.
And now, you probably know this because you guys know a whole lot more than I do, but I'm sure you're aware that Glenn Beck wasn't raised a Mormon, even though he is now. Glenn Beck chose Mormonism as an adult after he had had a disastrous life of drug addiction and dependency and destroying his family. And he felt like, sort of almost like Bill Wilson, a very pragmatic, just like utilitarian view of religion. Like, well, gee, maybe it'll just make me a better person. And so he wanted something that was good for his family to keep them together. So he looked at all the different religions, and he wasn't really looking to see which one was the most true, which one had the most information, that you had the least leap of faith, that it was real. He decided, according to his own words, because I read them, on which one he thought was more family-oriented. And that's where Mormonism won hands down, because it believes in the eternal family unit and thus and so. And so he decided Mormonism was more family-oriented. He wasn't going to nitpick about whether it was true or not. Mm-hmm. And so he picked it as an adult. And since then, he has been faithful.
Right.
And in my last show I just recorded, I went over this email that they had in their records. He had to Tim Ballard, I think I mentioned in the beginning of this show, where he basically is pulling strings with Senator Mike Lee in Utah, with the Attorney General, with the top apostles in the Mormon Church. And basically, he has them on the Rolodex call. He can get them immediately because he's a big financier.
Mm-hmm.
They're in the Mormon. Not that the Mormon Church doesn't have a ton of money still, but still, he carries a lot of heavy weight. And they were all looking at this, even though it was state officials, people that were responsible for just civic issues and things, all about the issue and how it looked with the church. And in the email, even that, he talks about if we are in the times I think we're in, Tim, all the forces are let loose against all the forces of good, and the forces of evil will be arrayed against you, and they're out there to tear down our church and tear down our nation. I'm slightly paraphrasing, but it was very much an apocalyptic view that Glenn Beck was saying that, and he was part of waging it. His microphone every week was on behalf of the Mormon Church to wage what they thought their war was. And of course, he sees it in a broader sense that other conservative people would be on the same side generally, although he wants to bring them into the Mormon covenant. And that's the great cynicism when you get a guy like David Barton. David Barton has very extreme evangelical beliefs that would run in loggerheads with Mormon. But the fact is, they make a lot of money together. They work well together. They can back each other up on the generic things about America's divine destiny. David Barton doesn't have to get into the particulars, whether it's a Mormon destiny or a evangelical. If it's divine destiny and that gets people to pay money and to get him speaking engagements and buy books, then that's good enough.
Well, and just to be totally honest about it without necessarily picking on Mormons, I mean, you all know I have a lot of family history and the origins of the Mormon church and stuff. But if anyone is a candidate for believing in noble lies, it's definitely that organization.
And psychologically and in their conscience, they can rationalize it. They can deal that for a greater cause, in other words. Well, I tell you what, some other people are trying to catch up with them, Sergio.
Yeah.
In the evangelical world I come from, they're working really hard to try to surpass, and swallowing some whoppers. Okay. The Paul Bunyan level of lore.
Right.
This is the kind of stuff that they're trying to swallow. But a lot of people, like I said, they don't know that this whole thing about just trying to save kids from trafficking is tied into all this deep mystical stuff that people purposely don't want to tell their many sponsors what they're up to.
Yeah. Let's switch gears a little bit, although it's kind of similar. I think everything kind of has a theme here, but let's talk about what's going on in the world. Let's talk about what's going on, what has happened this year, and how it's going to affect next year. Because I really believe that, obviously, I think this is probably true of every year, but 2023 seems like it's the precursor, calm before the storm, to borrow a QAnon phrase, to 2024, which I think is going to be probably a really, really crazy year. It's probably going to be one of the craziest elections. If you thought 2020 was crazy, here's the sequel. So I think to start off with, we'll just get into the politics, to the political stuff. I think one of the things that we're talking about is Trump possibly getting renominated. And that's in light of several indictments that have come over the last year, whether we're going to see any of that, if any of that is going to make a difference or not. I don't know if any of that's going to see any time in court. I know at least one of them will as of January, but that's probably one of the least consequential ones. But we've had things that happened this year, like the whole Speaker of the House thing, that gave us somebody like Mike Johnson, who's, if Trump gets elected, he's going to pretty much be a rubber stamp. So let's talk a little bit about that on kind of like the political front. What you see is going to happen, how this whole election of 2024 is going to turn out, and then we can kind of move into some of the more international sphere. Real curious of your thoughts on that.
Well, one of the things that makes this difficult, because I have a really poor track record at predicting what's going to happen. Even though named Dr. Future, I still have a poor record. what you just said about it being a really crazy year, that doesn't make it very easy to predict things when it's a very crazy year.
Right.
Because it's an unstable system. And so all it takes is a few perturbations and you send it off in another direction. It doesn't have a self-stabilizing thing like our society used to have. Like, I'm going to be a little geeky engineer here. Like your suspension, it has a shock absorber and a spring. And what that does is that when it takes shocks to it, mathematically they figure it out that it will restabilize. If you don't stabilize in a system, it gets resonant, and then it just keeps getting bigger and bigger swings back and forth until it comes apart. And there's a corollary in social systems in that you get a shock, and sometimes, like a wheel traveling in a car, you're going to shift from like a far left to far right, or more fascist, more liberal, back and forth, different thing. But if you don't have a system that takes out the extreme components of the vibration that bring it back to center, it will just start resonating. It's almost a little bit like what we see in the Middle East there in Palestine, where you get these revenge killings in their culture, or the other side took the last hit, we're going to have to make it bigger on our side. And then the other side says, well, we're going to make it bigger to teach them a lesson. And so I'm afraid the stabilizing forces are becoming ineffective in our system. So everything is getting polarized to the more extreme. And I think just in the last day or two, a major milestone has happened in that in Iowa, I believe Trump has now reached 51%. Now, one poll in one state is not defining anything, but, Iowa has never been his strong suit because, evangelicals were a little skeptical of him at the beginning. He had to come back in New Hampshire and beyond. But by hitting 51%, what that means is it's no longer an issue of all of the not Trump candidates winnowing out, where you get down to probably a Nikki Haley. Okay. That's
Which,
not
by
going
the
to cut
way,
it.
we've got these debates going on right now
Yeah.
that he's not even participating in.
Right. And the one they just had the lowest viewership, I think, in the history of the debates. Of course, it didn't help it was on News Nation. But people have made their minds, more or less, Social media probably is supplanting. I like to watch, I'm a geek. I like to watch a full debate. I like to watch a full press conference or testimony before Senate, or, so that way you don't get somebody editing out tidbits. You get it in context. Well, that's sort of passé. People don't want that. They want zingers. They want to hear a 60-second or 20-second zinger that can be put on social media. And so the politicians know that, and that's what they go for, something that's quotable. But by crossing the 51%, the issue is no longer how do we winnow down to someone who can then take the majority against Trump. In the Republican camp, the majority is now Trump. So it doesn't matter how many other candidates there are at that point. One thing I'm curious about in the conventions this next summer is the Republican convention this time going to be like it was in 2020, in that, from my understanding, in the first time in the history of the political parties, they did not write, much less approve, any party platform for the Republican Party in 2020. There was no platform that was even attempted, much less approved. It was basically whatever Trump decides to do, we will do.
That's unusual. Yeah.
I don't know of a single convention that they did not, because what the thought was, the one who's running the ship is the party. The party's going to come up with the ideology, and we're going to have the platform of what our policies are going to be. And then you pick a candidate that will follow that. Okay. Well, the last time, I mean, if you needed any proof that it was just a personality cult, when you look at a major political party that doesn't even try to do a platform, it's just whatever Trump decides to do at any moment is what we'll do. And very few people just seem to grasp how scary that is, even if it was a Democrat or anybody else. It's like whatever our vaulted leader does, that's what we'll do. Nobody else is involved. We'll just whatever it is, we'll get behind it. And I don't know why they wouldn't do the same thing this year. I don't know. Well, first of all, with what we've seen, what it took for them to get a Speaker of the House, can you imagine them trying to decide on a platform? And that's why when it's highly fractured like it is, maybe that's why they like a strong man that ignores them, because then they aren't polarized by having to use normal political parliamentary type compromise, because none of them know how to compromise. So a strong man comes in and ignores them. Well, then they don't have to fret about selling out. They just sort of go along with it. So, that's a legacy on a political party that even if Trump dropped dead tomorrow, which, by the way, a hell thing could happen to either one of these characters, throw everything into a loop. But
that's true.
The legacy of just deferring to a strong man within a major party to do whatever they see fit, I think that'll be a ghost that'll come to haunt us for a long time. That's third world stuff, that's Central American. So the wild cards are health issues, the Democratic Party overwhelmingly would rather have somebody else run. There could be some ego on behalf of Joe Biden. He wouldn't be the first politician to have an ego. But I think he's afraid that nobody else can stand the onslaught of Trump, and he beat him once. And I don't think that's enough to rely on. And so will they show up on their end? And I sort of, a lot of people are mad about this getting onto the international thing about the whole thing with Israel. This one has split the Democratic Party. And it's split it between the institutionalists, who are very strongly Israeli, and then you've got the grassroots people who are not. And will they lose them like they left Hillary Clinton, when Bernie ran? I'm sure that had to play some big role with the Bernie people who stayed home, felt like that they got steamrolled in the Democratic candidate. Is that going to happen with this issue? Maybe it'll die down. I don't know. But they're pretty mad at the Democratic establishment. In fact, I don't know if you heard today, but even President Biden told the Democrat leadership that, and he told Netanyahu that people were losing their support for the Israelis.
Yeah, I was about to mention that. We're recording this on the 12th, and it says that. Here's from Reuters. Biden says Netanyahu must change, Israel losing global support. That's a big deal. And
was it 156 nations voted for a ceasefire today?
Yeah,
and I think America was the only one who voted vetoed.
That was the other day, was it not? I think. Then the UN General Assembly votes. Well, that was in the Security Council.
Right, where the veto. But then the General Assembly voted like 156 votes for. So, without like taking sides or whatever, I'm just saying that dynamic is going to be a major challenge, I think, for the Democratic Party. But what I'm curious is when they walk up to the voting booth, are they going to be prepared for living with a potential Trump presidency? And Trump says a lot of hooey. He says a lot of stuff that he doesn't even know what he's saying. He just likes to get applause and some whoops and stuff. But he does some of the stuff he says. And
well, he made a statement of just like, I'm going to be a dictator, but only on day one. He said something like that.
That's what I'm getting to. Yeah. That's what I'm getting to. Now, when people walk in the voting booth and they're really, really mad at Joe Biden or the Democrats or whatever, they're going to have to ask themselves, are they prepared for that? Because what is that going to be a day like The Purge? Like the movie? Is that
right?
I mean, is that just going to be like, y'all do whatever you have to do on these folks? They might be running through the libraries, grabbing all the books out and burning them. Who knows? But, there'll be no enforcement of it or something like that. Or worse, grabbing people out and setting them on fire.
Yeah.
But he has said that again since then because it got a rise out of people. Mm-hmm. If it gets people worked up, that's all Trump needs. It's like, okay, that really triggered people, so I'm going to keep saying it. Mm-hmm. And so will he do that, when that happens? I think we've already got a critical mass of the public who can sleep at night and have no problem with that. Whether it's legal or not, doesn't mean a hill of beans to them. And so it reinforces what I have always said, that we don't have a Donald Trump problem. We have a Donald Trump follower problem. And those people, when he croaks or becomes unavailable to serve, they're not disappearing. Maybe they'll find somebody else even gutsier to replace him. I don't know. Well, so this is not just going to be an old man we have to wait out. This is a movement that doesn't. If the January 6th insurrection wasn't a slap in the face to get people to look in the mirror and say, what are we doing? Or if it took them like 3 days to go back to their old ways, then what's going to be the next shoe to drop that get them to say, oh, it's too much?
Well, okay. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Mike Johnson.
Yeah.
You mentioned the January 6th insurrection. They're already trying to rewrite the history. They're releasing all this raw footage that supposedly shows that the police let them in, which I think some police might have actually let them in.
Yeah.
I've always kind of maintained that. But Mike Johnson, his nondescriptness is, I think, the really scary part of someone like him. He is and like Sir Fiel knows what I'm talking about. He's what the Soviets called an apparatchik.
Yep.
Does what the master tells him to do. These guys that were around Stalin, these were, the apparatchik. That describes someone like Mike Johnson.
But he has enough.
And on the other side,
he has enough ideology to energize him to want to do that.
Right. Well, the other side, that's what I'm saying. The other side of him is that he is a very much Christian nationalist.
Right. Proud Christian nationalist. Not afraid of the term either. He didn't dispute it like, well, that's a pejorative term. No, I certainly am. Just like Matt Gaetz and others say, I'm proud, Christian nationalist. They see that as a major plus. Yet they're starting to make Marjorie Taylor Greene look like the voice of reason.
Well, that's the thing, though. That's the thing, though, about somebody like Mike Johnson. He's not, he's nondescript. He doesn't say outrageous, crazy things. He's just a normal-looking guy. He looks like, people have joked that he looks like your State Farm. He has the name of your State Farm agent.
Yeah.
And it is guys like that will sign off on anything.
That's just like the way Himmler looked.
Yep. Right.
Himmler just looked like the mousiest kind of guy who would be in the background, totally unintimidating looking. Little mousy glasses, but he got it done.
Yeah.
It was like there was nothing behind those glasses, like a soul.
Just for the Führer.
Yeah.
I think, though, too, it's like the Christian nationalism, as we've been talking about, is just it is something that's really just on the rise, and it's something that's going to probably bring Trump back into the White House, and they'll have their guy again. and who knows what is going to happen when we sit back down here in a year. Like what are we going to be? What are we going to be talking about? Oh man, 2025 is going to be crazy because they're going to be going house to house. I mean, who knows?
Well, the FCC may have something to decide about your show too.
I mean, Surfiel might be in a different country because they might all the West Coast states might break off. I mean, who knows what's going to happen?
He'll probably get arrested because if they apply the least pressure to me, I'm afraid I would crack and give away Surfiel.
Oh,
Molan LaBey. The one thing I'm more afraid of than Donald Trump will just do whatever protects his butt, basically. Is the followers that are so committed to this, whether he's there or not.
Right.
They'll just go, and they're not going anywhere. When you saw Japan conquered, it was amazing how quickly they were able to bring them under control. I mean, when you think about what they did at the Bataan Death March and that, what was it, Unit 731 or whatever it is, or they did all those horrible atrocities and other stuff, and then you take them, their emperor worship, and a few years under some, military dictatorship of the American government, radically changed their culture and became very docile. I don't see that happening to this crowd. I don't think that they'll, what were we thinking? Because right. January 6th didn't do it. January 6th did, it did, some of the guys in Washington, it did it for 48 hours. They all, McCarthy and these other ones got up there and talked about how despicable it was. And you had Lindsey Graham, never again. It was nice while it lasted, Donald, but this is too much. This is it. And so, and Mitch McConnell, they all badmouthed him there in the night of January 6th. And what was it? 2 days later, McCarthy's down there meeting at Mar-a-Lago with him. It was all over at that point.
It didn't take long. And like I said, I mean, it's the history is already being in the process of being rewritten.
Yeah.
But, one thing that I didn't put down on the piece of paper that I sent you, Mike, and we have talked about this a little bit before in your show, is that this year, 2023, has been the year where Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter, changing it to X, has really come into effect. And I can tell you that, and I thought at first it was me with the algorithms, but it's a lot of people have said the same thing, that it has become a cesspit. Yeah, I mean, just straight neo-Nazi stuff, transphobia, anti-Semitism,
if the algorithms are
all kinds of stuff.
If they're supposed to work the way that they're supposed to, then most of these people we're talking about wouldn't naturally get fed this type of stuff that they're getting fed.
Right.
It's meant to just maximize, your habits already and sell more shit to you. It's not that. It's very towards extremism.
Yeah, Sergio, you and I've been talking lately that because you've been on TikTok a lot more than I have, and you have found just the craziest shit.
Yeah, I think I was kind of being a poser, and I was just really surprised at the algorithms on my YouTube shorts and my Instagram reels. So I decided to do a little experiment, and on my TikTok, which I just use for music stuff, and I don't even have much engagement on there at all. But I started seeing where the algorithms would take me in the paranormal conspiracy worlds, and just started liking and favoriting and following accounts with the weirdest shit. And now I'm fully into an algorithm of the most, I don't know what I call it, just a conspiracy theory of reality type of stuff. Everything from Tataria stuff to a lot of stuff about the firmament, videos trying to prove that these rockets are just hitting the firmament wall and we've never been to space because they just bounce off the firmament.
Which comes out of the flat earth shit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there's a lot of that, a lot of something we've talked about that I think is kind of interesting, and it's been around in some kind of form for a while, but as far as like paranormal evidence on video, you got UFO videos, you've got ghost videos, Sasquatch videos, but a trend that's really picking up is this glitch in the matrix type of video where something is showing that there's a glitch in the matrix, that someone is like stuck, or like it'll show like there's this one that's really famous with a cat that's like, licking some water that's coming out of a spigot, and it's like, oh, it's frozen, it's stuck, it's a glitch in the matrix. So I've been seeing a lot of that stuff, but it's full on like I said, conspiracy theory of reality stuff, and the reptilian stuff is still really popular, which I think was kind of a precursor to this. Like I found this one account where someone is just filming their low resolution television screen on like C-SPAN at UN meetings or Congress, and like the people in the background in like really low resolution, videotaping on a cell phone look kind of blurry and weird, and they're like, see, they're reptiles, etc. So it's a cesspool for sure, but I want to see where it would go, and it does go all the way to just total insanity. No minuscule part of consensus reality left at all.
This has become the drug Soma. This is the Soma of Brave New World. It's just an electronic drug that people check out from reality. Meanwhile, the fascists go do whatever they want because everybody else is just sort of in their own unreality world.
Well, and it feeds into all this. Yeah. It can feed into all this political stuff, because it's like if you start questioning the history that they tell you, then you question who are the elites really. Then you question, is the earth flat? Then people can very quickly have this really vague anti-establishment identity that can be used for any kind of purpose.
Yeah, I mean, so there was this documentary series that I watched not long ago about the cult of Mother God. And this was this small cult that really fed off this kind of conspirituality, new age stuff. The same kind of stuff that you're talking about, right? And she just pulled from everywhere. Okay, ascended master stuff. Basically, yeah. She said she had these galactics that she talked to, and one of them was Saint Germain. Well, we listens to this show knows that comes straight out of Theosophy. I am movement, all that. And, but Trump is one of those, and they all love Trump. And they, when she dies because she, was a raging alcoholic with a failed liver, turning blue from drinking colloidal silver, that her followers thought she was going to resurrect, and Trump was literally going to come down in Air Force One and take him with her with him. And, it's just crazy stuff. But this is not too far indicative from what a lot of people actually believe and perceive as reality.
Well, and it's not necessarily that they have to believe it. It's about creating this distance and this.
It's a hyper reality.
Yeah, it doesn't require you to actually believe it. It encourages you to question everything, which means you have nothing in common with any consensus.
Right. And I think the evangelicals too have fallen into this trap as well. I mean,
there's definitely a crossover with the New Age and with Mormonism, like what you're talking about, Mike, and all of it. Yeah.
I'll give you a case in point of that on the Mormon side that kept coming up in my research. That Ken Krogh guy who just follows this Tom Harrison guy everywhere, who uses this pseudonym Spencer for visions of glory and his near-death experiences, and has this huge following in the Mormon world. I found this outfit, it was something like Pro Care or something. It was an outfit that I don't think it ended up going anywhere, but they had a conference just a couple of years ago about getting psychological care that wasn't tied to the principles of psychology or accepted practice, but used more of a religious way, supernatural way to give psychological help to people. And at this conference, there's Eternal Core, I think was the name of it, Eternal Core. And they had the people who were participating to help and it was a who's who. They had a Tim Ballard. They had this Tom Harrison guy who was like the granddaddy, Ken Krogh, a few other people we've mentioned, and then there was a Jody Hildebrand and another woman that was there with her that was all on the speaker list. Does that ring a bell with you, Jody Hildebrand? She is very famous as a counselor for family relations, marital relations, raising children. She's like an internet sensation. There's another woman whose name escapes me who had a Mormon family, had like 7 kids. I don't know if they advertise they're Mormon, but they are. And this is the stuff people groove on YouTube or internet. She basically would just do day in the life stuff of here's how we solve our problems and deal with 7 people in the family. And here's what I've learned works raising kids or doing things. And this other woman supposedly was the expert. Well, she took her under her wing. And what happened over time was she started this Hildebrand woman. You find out she's really a man hater. Okay. She's this supposed expert on family relations. She's like a lot of people I've seen in that area. Everything is based upon you not dealing with reality. You don't accept your own shortcomings. You don't accept responsibility for the failures in your life. It's all you. It's nobody else's fault. For anything, you have to accept and own up to it. And so she sort of branded that like almost a trademark. Okay. Accept the truth. You've got to accept the truth, not live a fake. Well, she started getting this woman and sort of slowly wheeling her away from her own family, telling her how bad her husband was. Now, her husband probably wasn't trustworthy, probably cheating on her. He probably was watching pornography. She shouldn't trust it. Same thing with the kids. So she started getting this woman to like live with her most of the time. Okay. Now, these people are both very, very famous on the internet. So they start doing a show together that's like one of the top rated shows. Well, just recently, one of the younger woman's kids who was staying at this Jody Hildebrand's house broke free and got to a neighbor's house. And they had rope burns around their wrist, and tape burns, were malnourished, looked like they're ready to die from malnutrition. And he pleaded with them, please call the cops, please call it. Well, they raided the house and found all these kids that had been chained up. And, at her other house and at this Hildebrand house too. And basically just doing horrible things. They would take like chili pepper and rub it into the wounds, the rope burns of the kids. Meanwhile, all of these spiritual people, Christian, Mormon, others, were seeing them as the role models online on how to raise families and children. And they're part of the same circle, okay? Another set of groups that are really big in the Mormon world lately was a woman, her last name's Vallow. And I'm trying to remember the guy she was with. But anyway, they got to be one of these apocalyptic prepper groups that would look at books like this Visions of Glory I was telling you about, and they would study on how to prepare for the imminent apocalypse. Well, she started, this man started being part of their study group, and he said that, in a prior life they were married, and they were married to each other before she was married to her current husband. Mm-hmm. And all of these other things went on. And eventually, before it was all done, appears that they had killed each other's spouses.
Yeah.
And they eventually killed her kids.
Yeah. This was huge news. This made the national news. I mean, this was big a few years ago.
And ended up in Hawaii.
Yep.
And when they went and served her papers, for murder and the other stuff, she was reading that Visions of Glory on the video at the pool while she was doing this. And so this is a big discussion too on how this is this Tom Harrison book I was telling you about that's doing the other thing. Supposedly what Tim Ballard was telling these women was that the same Thomas Harrison guy who'd had the near-death experiences had told him was that in his vision, he had seen Tim Ballard, who all the evangelical Christians are following now, that in his vision, he was going to be not only the senator, but the president of the United States, and that he would become the prophet of the Mormon church and would personally usher in Jesus Christ. And Tim Ballard believed that.
But Tim Ballard doesn't have an inflated sense of himself.
No, heavens no, very humble. Yeah. Right. But he believed what he had told him. So it just looks like here's these good guys just rescuing kids, and what's not to like. But they've got this whole mystical thing going on that they can't see out of it and see the insanity that and we look at Jim Jones and Jonestown and we think, well, how could that stuff ever happen?
Yeah,
I guess it could happen all the time.
It does. It absolutely happens all the time. I mean, just cults are numerous and abundant now,
and I
because
think
people have really just lost their sense of meaning. And I think that if you find a charismatic leader, someone that you can look up to, or that says all the right things, it's very, very easy for people to fall into it.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter what, whether it's a Christian cult or it's a New Age cult, it really doesn't matter. It's all the same thing, essentially.
What do you think historians 100 years from now, if we're still here, are going to say, what was the biggest cult of the last 5 or 10 years in our society?
Well,
which had the biggest reach with the most fantastic claims?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
and had the biggest impact on society.
Right. I think you're referring to MAGA. I mean, that type of political movement, I mean, essentially mimics a cult, but just on a larger national scale. And we've seen examples of that before.
To subsume QAnon, of which, Mr. Trump never really, he just spoke about all the great people in it, just like at Charlottesville. Right. A lot of good things there. And that QAnon said, well, he'll first say, oh, I don't know anything about that. I don't know what you're talking about when there's something bad happened. But then he'll say, but I hear there's some really fine people in it, though.
Well, he at first said, I hear they like me a lot. So I think that's all he really cared about.
Right.
Essentially.
So it's interesting to think 100 years in the future, what are they going to think about what they observe now? Like after the insurrection, the whole COVID era, and all these people, and there's like a world pandemic health emergency, and people insist in gathering in large groups to try to make a statement. When people, during the Delta part of it, when it was a high death rate, and they're insisting, and getting their Herman Cain Award, what are people going to be thinking about that in the future? You're
taking the stance that there's going to be historians in the future,
or that it's going to go in a positive direction. Yeah, they might see it as another great spiritual awakening, where
beginning of the golden
what's
age.
Important.
Yeah, beginning.
Well, as we're kind of closing things out, international stage, we did talk a little bit about the Israel-Hamas war. I don't think I really want to talk too much about that, just because.
Oh, come on, that's an easy one to solve.
Oh yeah,
right.
Just it's
right here on Conspirinormal.
It's so complicated, but tied to all this and the congressional stuff, we talk about Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House.
Yeah,
Zelensky was here in the United States today. And like Ukraine, I think we talked about this last year. Where the hell is this going to go? And then also too, just a report came out that it's estimated that the Russians have lost 315,000, which is a crazy amount.
Catastrophic.
Considering that, like, in 4 years of World War II, we lost something like 450,000.
They've lost something like 5,800 tanks, which dwarfs Stalingrad in what they've lost. I also heard
But the Ukrainians are also getting decimated as well.
Well, they're losing a ton too. But, I heard today, this is from the Americans, that the Russians lost 87% of the army that they had at the start of the war. Of those original, the army that Russia had, 87% of those people are gone.
Right.
So that's why they had to bring all the prisoners in, and the martyrs and stuff to replace them. Or immigrants from far away. Now they're bringing Cubans in to fight. But yet they know that the West doesn't have much of will to anything. We haven't even felt any kind of really significant inconvenience from it, and we're still throwing in the towel.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of seems that way because it seems like the Republicans are not interested in the funding, and I think that's honestly one of these things that has been beaten across through a lot of social media. That yes, we have. There's a very possibility that we probably have put things into somewhat of a black hole. All these billions of dollars. People are always going to say that. They're always going to say, "Why are we helping another country when we could put it back here?" But
you've heard of the Internet Research Agency, right?
Yeah,
out of St. Petersburg. Internet Research Agency.
Yeah, I'm aware of them. Yeah,
largest player on the internet. Owned originally by Prigozhin.
Yep.
So you're always going to have
who non-suspiciously died in a plane crash, right?
Right. Which shows what happens. You can trust Putin when you make a treaty and when you make an agreement with him. Putin will always honor the agreement. Just ask Prigozhin.
Sophie, are you still drinking Putin's favorite beer?
No, I'm drinking 100% American Rainier.
Not East German communist beer.
No more. What was it? Rataburger.
Sorry, Mike. I didn't mean to derail your train of thought there.
I may have seen some of that when we had our honeymoon. We went to a concentration camp on our honeymoon, and we went to Hitler's bunker on our honeymoon.
That's romantic.
Yeah. Stood right
Which
over
concentration camp did you go to?
Did you guys both pop a Tylenol just for the heck of it?
Do what? What did you say?
Pop a Tylenol just for the ritual of it?
I didn't know that.
Tylenol.
Yeah,
pop a Tylenol and click a gun to your head at the same time.
Oh, is that? See, I didn't.
Did you
know
give one to the dog right before?
Yeah, well, I think it was something else, but yeah, just
Okay, no, I wasn't hip enough for that. But we stayed in Dresden, right? Sort of right after the wall came down, and took a ride up to Berlin and saw Hitler's bunker. So probably saw some of that beer there on the eastern side. I got chewed out in Prague. We were looking at the walls, and I asked him, there's these ancient walls through Prague, and this guy was, I guess, from Czechoslovakia after they got freed there. And I said, did the Romans build those walls? And he says, no, we did. We were the slaves. And at that point, he would only speak in German the rest of the tour. He wouldn't even speak in English for Ginger and I. So I caused a little international incident on our.
You've been known to do that.
Yeah. But I did stay at the Hotel Gorbachev. When I first started working in Russia, it was the hotel that one of the things that gave Gorbachev to agree to step down when they surrounded him at his dacha and they negotiated. They gave him this Hotel Gorbachev, and so that's where I got to stay before I got to go to a secret city. Got smuggled into called Star City, and see Yuri Gagarin's uniform.
For the listeners, I think you guys don't know how Mike always makes these references. I remember when we did the question and answer session for the first Strange Realities, and you can hear Mike just say something like, "What is this, a Politburo meeting?"
Well, we were looking a little old, the attendees. So,
what did you have a lot of hope at that time? Did you think that we were going to really mend things and help former Soviet Union and Russia come back into the fold of the West?
Well, that was the Yeltsin time. Okay, so I came in right after that happened. What happened was that society was turned on its ear.
Yeah.
All of the really well-to-do people
and everything
were suddenly like poor as all get it out. Like, because I dealt with scientists, engineers, doctors. The middle class were the people who interacted with the West, like translators. Mm-hmm. The upper class were these people that had these little photomat kiosks selling bootleg, black market videotapes and stuff, and they were everywhere on the street. And that was the burgeoning of capitalism there. But, everybody knew that, he was corrupt, Yeltsin, but he wasn't totalitarian like Putin, who he picked. So where my hope was not in the government, but I got to actually meet the people. I worked with an older scientist there who was in his late 60s, didn't speak English. I brought him over to the States because we did a joint project together, and I took him to a barbecue restaurant, and he looked at all these pictures of these old black blues artists, and he knew every one of them. And I asked the translator how he knew them, and he says, well, we used to smuggle them in the old days. And he says it was punishable with imprisonment if they caught it. And he said it's music of the soul. But he described his government at the time as the gangsters. He says our government's like the 1920s America gangster era. And I really loved the people I met because they would literally give the shirt off your back. I remember I accidentally dropped in to see some older woman in an apartment, and we were there for like less than a minute, and she had to go out and dig out a brooch out of her chest of drawers to give me because I honored her by dropping by to see her for 1 minute. And that had a big impression. Some other guy gave me a bunch of fish tackles that he made, bait, lures is what I'm trying to say, that he made when he and his good old boys used to go out fishing in the Ukraine, actually. And he gave me, I still have those. So, that tainted my view that if we could get our governments out of the way, we would find much in common. But here's the other thing that's happened, Sir Phil. Both in their country and in my own, I have been terribly disappointed and heartbroken that I felt like I knew people on both sides and they've not turned out to be who I thought they were. Because you look at the polls in Russia, it's not that the overwhelming number of people are just wanting freedom and they can't get out from under Putin.
Yeah.
I'm guessing the majority of them really do like what he's doing. And it is a real discrete minority that's trying to resist. I've had the bigger disappointment in my own country with the people I thought I knew.
Yeah.
So, it's a tragedy all around.
You'd think if you got around the rotten leaders, we'd all be okay. I wish it was that simple.
Yeah. And I think just much like here, but just on a much more, and this could still happen, but just on a much more just government control basis, that 24-hour, they have that 24-hour news cycle, and it just continually, it's a continual brainwashing.
Yeah.
Continual. And I can imagine that, like, and a lot of, the kind of the last gasp of some of the real independent minded stations in Russia, once the war started last year, that's done, essentially.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they had to split. A couple women, they held signs on air, about this war is wrong. And that was the end for them. So, going back to the last time I spoke a few years ago at your Strange Realities conference, and I talked about all these different technologies used to alter our realities, like binaural beats, and how hypnotism has been incorporated in the technique of relaxing the left lobe of your brain to let your accepting right lobe take in everything. And there's auditory, there's visual, electromagnetic, all sorts of things to let your left lobe sleep that discerns things and lets the all-accepting right lobe take it in. And at the conclusion, I said, when you look at this, you realize that we're bringing a knife to the gunfight of the info war. We don't have a chance with these people, with all these. I even talked about the occult memetics, about memes, by people who are competent to know how to push buttons in just an image. Mm-hmm. And I said, the only thing I can recommend to people, because I don't have all the answers, but what I'm going to do, now that I recognize this, is I'm going to go back and figure out what my basic values are. And I'm going to go figure out where they came from figure out how robust they are, how timeless they are, how long do they have a track record of working in different cultures, and make sure where they came from, and rely on that more than I do this barrage of information trying to twist and turn me. And I know that's not a perfect answer, but that's the only thing I got with this, because I do recognize that my brain doesn't have the tools to handle this stuff coming at us, unless you're going to go be a monk somewhere, and then you're uninformed. You don't know anything what's going on. Don't even know man landed on the moon, So what can you do is you have basic values like the golden rule, don't harm people, let people be themselves as long as they don't harm you. Be honest. That honesty has virtue and worth it. Even if it's something you don't want to hear. Those basic things like that. Unless we hang on to those and then be very, very skeptical on everything else we hear coming from strangers. That's what this info is. It's come from strangers. Now, if someone has a long journalistic career, I think you should at least factor that in. If they have a long track record of something that has been beneficial, that doesn't mean they're always right, but it means you take it a little more seriously. But mostly these are strangers. And I heard some folks on an interview I did the other day who had heard me talk a long time ago. They said, talking about in a religious context, they said, yeah, you refer to these people like these preachers and televangelists as hirelings. And that includes sometimes your local pulpit. And they said, I never really looked at them differently after that. I said, well, that's just what Jesus called them, And if you remember, these people are hirelings. And in a secular sense, that's true too.
Mm-hmm.
These people are contracted out. They're mercenaries of information. They're mercenaries, job. And they will fight to overwhelm you, and they'll use every dirty trick in the book to change how you think of things. And your question is, are you going to let them do it or not? The problem I have is that a lot of people say the only answer is just to run away. Just run away and avoid everything. And so they immerse themselves into sports or their hobbies or making money or doing all this stuff because they can't sort it out and they don't want to put the energy to do it. And since we live in a society of self-government, at least theoretically, I think that's a cop-out. I don't think we have a right to that and at the same time expect to live in a free society, which means we have to be grown-ups and make at least an attempt to try to sort out and distill things out. And good journalism, what they used to do, that's why I like this guy, this Lynn Packer I've seen. He'll make sure that, he'll try to find out, well, did they have something to say about this? Do they have a retort? I'll try to, contact the people that we were talking bad about to see if they have a comment on it or dispute this information, or I'll at least go double check it. That's all very time consuming. But if we're going to be responsible citizens, I guess we got to bite the bullet. That's the price of the information age. The only thing I let my guard down is when I hear Conspirinormal, because I know there's nothing that's going to be untrue come out of this.
Oh, yeah.
And for 13 years, 14 years, it's never let me down.
We haven't been around that long. It's only been, actually, we're going on 12. We're going on 12.
Okay. I'm an engineer. I'm not real good on the ciphers and the counting. Sorry.
There may be some guests that we've had on in the past that have, said some.
Usually the guy on the end of the year is the question.
That guy, yeah. Well, Dr. Future, I want to thank you for coming on. I mean, this has been a real pleasure, and I think we've had a really great discussion, and I think time is, of course, only going to tell what is going to happen, but I would just stay tuned for a lot of craziness, guys, because that's how I think things are going to be. But
what's crazy is that we're in a point now where two guys who volunteer and don't make any money on any of this stuff, who have real lives that they lead, working jobs, are the place you have to come to hear the voices of reason.
Yeah.
In the this is what we've come to. If it's not guys like you, where are people going to have a calm, reasoned, with the ability to retort,
right,
and not have some wealthy people come up and give you a script to read and to say, you stick with this and follow this formula, and make sure you get as many good wise cracks and cheap shots in as you can. Your place is a place where people are allowed to develop a thought, make their case. You treat them with respect, yet at the same time you'll ask them questions. It's a dying breed.
Yeah, it really feels like that. I mean, it feels like it is. I mean, I've noticed that there has been in the last few years a real sea change in this kind of podcasting medium. I feel like that there's been much more of a pressure on creators if they want to make good money, just to keep themselves afloat financially, not just to be rich or whatever.
Right.
To where they seem to have to toe some kind of party line because either it's what gets them listeners or someone else is giving them the money to do so.
Yeah.
And that's how it really has felt in the last at least 3 or 4 years to me.
And like I've said a lot, I think it is a very vague stance more than anything, but it has very specific goals that it helps accomplish for certain very specific people. But I think a lot of people who participate in that think that, oh no, this is just the general new anti-establishment stance, but it has very specific goals that it accomplishes.
Can you elaborate a little more on that, Sergio?
Well, what I'm saying is what Adam's talking about is that this general line that people feel they have to tote is, say the line that we saw during Trump, the line that we saw during the pandemic, etc. It is thought of as just this new kind of the new anti-establishment. And it's really based on just vague stances, but it's actually politically exploited for very specific means.
Mm-hmm. I guess the vaguer the better, because you can throw a wider blanket over people and they don't ask, where's the beef?
Yeah.
They think, hey, they're talking to me. It's like the whole thing that the human trafficking. They don't have to get into detail about Mormon theology or other. It's like, well, this is a Christian organization. If you told most evangelicals, they would be certain that is an evangelical organization. They think that about Glenn Beck, and so the vagueness does serve.
If you keep peeling it back and you see what the real agenda is behind these larger, they're really belief systems more than anything.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I have learned that I think would make your show a lot better, because I'm on the cutting edge of social media, from having seen YouTube videos, is you need to start titling these shows like, "You'll never believe what Dr. Future said." Dr. Future bears all in this episode. The shocking findings of Dr. Future. When I'm an old person, so I go to YouTube to watch stuff, okay? When I've seen TikTok, I read the instructions on it because I had some people say, oh, you need to be on TikTok. And I saw in there that they say if you go over 30 seconds, it stresses the viewer. It's too much for them to process with 30 seconds or more of material.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, I think I understand the audience. But in YouTube, which used to be you go learn stuff. You go find some history, and you can, unlike the History Channel, you can go put in a keyword and find what you want. Now, when mine opens up, all I have is a scantily clad woman who just happens to be showing how to play a chord on a guitar.
Yeah.
Or a scantily clad woman.
And you're paying attention to the chord position on her fingers, right?
Yes. Or in the kitchen, that's going to show how to cook mashed potatoes, but they're scantily clad. And the rest of it is all the pictures with the guy with his hands on his cheeks with his mouth open, like, what you're getting ready to see is the most amazing thing in your life. And I'm thinking our society is turned into one big carnival sideshow, like Carnival Barker, Carnival Midway with the two-headed lady. Come and see the half man, half animal. You won't believe it.
Yeah,
and that's what's coming on both sides.
It's just about getting hits.
Yep.
Yeah, which is what they did. I mean, that was the carnival barkers. That's how they learned. And most of the stuff they learned in the carnival is what went into professional wrestling. Mm-hmm. The whole kayfabe all of the terms and everything came out of the carnival world to know how to hook people for their prurient interest.
The thing is about YouTube. YouTube isn't even the cutting edge of any of that.
Well, yeah, I know. As I say, it's for old people now. Well,
YouTube changed. They all changed because of TikTok.
Yeah, yeah.
That TikTok algorithm, the way they drive their videos, has completely changed everything else. And so, I'm gonna be old man screaming at a cloud because I guess I'll be 50 in a couple of years, so I'm just going to do it. It makes it so hard to find things on YouTube.
Yeah, right.
It's frustrating. Used to be I could type in the title of a video and I could find it. Now it's just like, there was something that Surfiel sent me that was part 2 of something where I'm like, where the hell is part 1? Well, I found part 1, but it had this guy said this about the powers that be. But the other video was the actual show part 2. Yeah. It's frustrating to try to find that. And I guess I think a lot of that has kind of migrated to things like archive.org if you want to try to find that stuff. But it's just like the TikTokization of it all that's what's driven all of this.
And it has fashioned the mind, because I know a few people who are younger people that's their main world, between that and gaming.
Right.
And it reflects how I don't know, it's chicken and the egg. So I don't know if it formed their brain or their brain helped encourage that format, but for some reason they reflect each other. It would be nice if we could find like an old coot environment for people like myself, and maybe you all will get like me and other to go and have adult conversations and, adult information. But then the question comes, is there enough of an audience? This gets me back to the beginning of our show here, talking about my radio show. Is there enough of an audience that just wants to sit as grown adults and methodically try to understand something important going on and take time to lay out the evidence? It would be almost as audacious as asking somebody to read a book.
Lord forbid. Well, I want to thank you, Mike. I really want to thank you for coming on. This has been excellent. Please tell everyone where they can find your radio show.
Okay.
And whether or not there's going to be a YouTube channel where Dr. Future is going to bear all finally.
Well, I've tried wolf a few times, but it wasn't intentionally. It was just because I'm incompetent. If you want to, regarding that latter point, if you'd like to listen to my show, I'd be honored. You'll be in very, very exclusive company if you listen to the show. In fact, you'll be able to say something you heard on the show in a crowd, and it's almost guaranteed nobody else will know it. The Two Spies Report radio show is on WRFN every Thursday at 5 o'clock Central Time, live. And if you're out of Nashville, it's normally on 103.7 FM is mostly where you can hear it. But if you go to radiofreenashville.org, at the top, there's a little bar for streaming. And at 5 o'clock, you'll see the Two Spies Report pop up, and just click on the little arrow and it should play. But on your latter point about getting it uploaded, that has always been my ultimate end game. And what I hope to do is to start that in January. in January to have. What I want to do is to take all these first 50 shows and archive them somewhere. So it'll probably say something like the original WRFN shows to Two Spies Report or something like that. If you Google that, you'll find them. That'll be up first. And then I've done all mine on video. Of course, I have a parallax problem. You can see me looking off of the center because I don't have a teleprompter. So it'll look like I'm cross-eyed because I'm sort of looking off the center of the camera. But you get to see me in all my handsomeness on video that I'm going to put on YouTube. And so, but they'll be in smaller clips. They'll be more, not quite TikTok length, but more digestible, like 15, 20-minute segments. And then I'll strip the audio off of those edited ones. That's going to take me a while to edit those and figure out how to edit video. And then those little segments will be a more, drive time digestible podcast. So I'm going to put the full 1 hour shows intact with the music for meditation. That's the plan. Park it somewhere. But then I'm also going to have the broken up into 2 or 3 segments, put it on YouTube with video and audio, and then take the audio parts of those and try to have a more of a traditional podcast. And then I'm going to get back and finish up volume 2 of the Two Spies Report, or the Two Masters and Two Gospels, which has just been sitting there rotting on my computer, ready to release.
All right.
Awesome. Well, that'll be great for everyone to be able to get access to that who's not able to catch it live or not in the terrestrial area.
Well, and if they have sleeping problems, it should take care of any kind of insomnia. My voice does it. It's like a sleeper holder, like a little handkerchief of chloroform. That's what it does. So they start hearing that. What they will do is absolutely adore Conspirinormal. If they hear a few of them, they will say, "Oh, this is the most interesting show I've ever heard in my life." But they have to be scared straight by hearing the Two Spies Report, and then you guys will become
one of our most
beloved
guests, and
Mike's self-deprecation game is on point,
knows no
guys.
bounds.
Well, I'm speaking on behalf of both listeners of my show. Right. But they do come in when Adam's on. We have a lot of the I don't know, they're like cult members themselves.
Yes.
The Adamites, I guess you could call them. That show up.
Pre-Adamite man.
Yeah, it is. They do look like, they do have a prehistoric look about them. But
all right.
Anyway, and Adam, I want to thank you publicly for pitying me and coming on the show and pitying my audience to come in and try to jazz it up a little bit. Everybody else, people don't want to associate with me. Okay, I'm a ghost, so I appreciate your pity.
You're welcome.
Even if you disguise it as friendship at times.
Well, it's good to have you as a friend, Mike. It's good to have you as a guest on the show. And where can people find Dr. Future these days? What's the main place?
I mean, if you're really asking for punishment, I'd love for you to take a look at my book. That's probably like the most coherent that I talk is in writing. And Two Masters and Two Gospels, Volume 1, The Teaching of Jesus versus the Leaven of the Pharisees and talk radio and cable news. That sounds very religious-y, but you're going to get a little bit of UFO cult religion in it. The foundations of the LSD movement in America, a little bit of Bohemian Grove, and all that is part of a narrative on the people who founded conservative Christian thinking. So that's at Amazon or Barnes & Noble and Walmart, any place else you can find it, and also ebook form. And then I got some other stuff coming out. I still have my blog up, the Two Spies Report .wordpress.com or twospiesreport.wordpress.com. As I always say, there's something there to offend everybody. And even the old Future Quake shows are still available.
Yeah.
All the way from 2005, they're still just parked there, futurequake.com under past shows tab. So if you want to find out, like if I have a new announcement or something, if you go to MikeBennettBooks.com or my publisher, akribospress.com, that's AKRIBOS press.com, you'll hear any late breaking announcements. And if you don't know who I am, there's a little bio up there you can read and this and that. Thank you for asking about that. I talk to people on shows and I always forget that. I never end up saying anything, because I get worked up on the topic.
Please sell your wares always on Conspiracy.
Absolutely.
Well, that's all I'm in this for is the big dollars and the big bucks. And it's been so successful for me so far. That's why it's really changed my standard of living. I can see that in you all too. I see the Conspirinormal jet fly over the house when you're coming in for speaking engagement.
That's why he was able to put in a jacuzzi and a pool in the back of the Dr. Future compound.
Yeah, I wish. Well, there was a pool back there for Buster, but it was a kiddie pool that I'd have to sit in. Yeah. So if you could just picture me in like a little tiny kiddie pool sitting in there with Buster, that's the exotic spa area for the Bennetorium.
All right, guys. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Future, for coming on and being a part of this. And we are not done with the year because Sergio and I still need to do our year in review. Coming up. Hopefully we'll get to do that next week. But
it's always easy.
Yeah, that one's always easy where we just review the episodes and from last year and how we feel about them. We'll probably talk about the Strange Realities Conference as well a little bit too, and our experiences with that and just what's been going on with us and hopefully see what's going on with the future since we had Dr. Future on, where we'll live the rest of our lives. But guys, you can find us conspirinormal.com. You can find us anywhere, podcasts, if you are just now listening to this. And we also have the YouTube channel as well, so give us a subscription to that too. And we also have Patreon, which we have been really bad about putting any new Patreon episodes up.
Sorry guys, we had a lot going on.
And yeah, we do. So please, but Sergio can tell you where to find that.
Well, even though you don't get weekly content all the time, but we are going to start doing that again. You can join a few secret societies for yourself at patreon.com/conspirinormal.
All right, guys, I want to thank you for listening, and we will talk to you soon on Conspirinormal.